Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, happy Halloween, depending on where you are and what your context is on this planet, which is wrapped in so many layers of turbulent change. It's hard to keep track. This is Andy Revkin, and what I try to do with Sustain What is help navigate complexity through conversation. And we've had all kinds of things going on the last few years related to nuclear war, which I first wrote about in 1985, way back early in my journalism career, in the context of climate change. The idea of a nuclear winter was a hot topic during the Cold War. And I've been kind of revisiting periodically. My other friends at the New York Times, like Bill Broad, has done a lot more of the heavy lifting on nuclear strategy, nuclear war. And after I left the Times on this platform, I've been dragged back into this arena because of Vladimir Putin, and now because of Donald Trump, and now because of a movie. Hardly the first movie on nuclear war, but it's stirring a lot of discussion, as ideally movies should. And it's A House of Dynamite, and I just watched it early this week with my wife. It's gripping and uncertain, right to the literally to the end credits. If you haven't seen it, you should see it. I don't want to spoil too much, but there will be spoilers, a couple of spoilers in this show today. Um, and all of this is about really the one aspect of the nuclear problem that is probably the most disturbing thing. How do when I was a kid, the discussion was about mutually assured destruction. Everything seemed kind of stable. We were in this mode of knowing each party, knowing their capacity. And now we're in a world with much more uncertainty. So the uncertainty monster within this is what we'll talk about today. And Laura Grego is a great guide to this. For more than 20 years, she's been at the Union of Concerned Scientists, an entity that was launched significantly because of nuclear war risk and other problems of the environment. And she's a senior scholar there and has written really deeply about ballistic missile defense, the shield idea, which is distinct from the mutually assured destruction concept. And the drivers again here are the movie and Donald Trump, who just yesterday on his platform said, "Okay, let's just start nuclear testing again." And then the Golden Dome, of course, has been in his brain for a while. It's resurfaced in a big way in the Big Beautiful Bill, the $24 billion theoretically set aside for a project that would, in his mind, be a shield that would keep us safe from even maverick entities like North Korea. So Laura, I'd love it if you can unmute and join the conversation. And good morning to you.
Good morning, Andy. Thanks for inviting me.
Again, thanks so much for all the work you've done. I wanted to start briefly by just having you explain a little bit about what drew you into this particular really tough arena. You have deep skills. You could work on anything from climate policy to who knows what. But what fixates you on the nuclear problem?
Wow, that's a great question. I am I'm Gen X, if you can tell by the way I look, and I grew up under the shadow of nuclear war. That was something that informed all of our cultural touchstones. I missed the duck and cover drill days, but I didn't miss the war games days. I was a little too young for the day after. We had too many little kids in the house to watch that as a family. But that was something we thought about all the time. And I think there was during my years being trained as a scientist, I'm trained as a physicist, and I did academic astrophysics for a while. I think we had this sense that nuclear weapons were something that we more or less dealt with, and we were on our way towards sort of eliminating them as a catastrophic existential threat. But that is not the case. As I was trying to think about what to do with my training, what kinds of problems to work on that I thought really needed to be worked on, this was one of them. How do we make sure human beings and other living things and our ecology continue to be able to have a safe future in the long term. And nuclear war is one of the few things that actually could end civilization as we know it, and wreck the environment. We can do that in a slow motion way through climate change, but nuclear war can do that in an afternoon.
Right,
So,
which is one reason I don't
yeah.
hyperfixate on climate.
Yeah.
I try to keep track of all the things that could really derail the human enterprise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, so I would argue that I think things are about as dangerous as they've ever been, at least since the Cuban Missile Crisis. The risks of war are higher. You know, there's a war in Europe that threatens to pull nuclear-armed adversaries into direct conflict. All of the nuclear weapons possessing countries are either rebuilding, modernizing, or expanding their arsenals. We have very fraught relationships between the three major nuclear powers: U.S., Russia, and China, and the relationships to manage crises are always really important when things can move as fast as nuclear war. And you pulled up the tweet by or whatever you call them now,
right.
by the U.S. president. There is nuclear brinksmanship all over. So it's not just the U.S. Certainly, I relate that to Russia as well. There's this idea that nuclear threats are permissible. Nuclear threats are a way to achieve political goals, and I think we're playing a lot fast and loose with nuclear threats. So, as you pulled up yesterday, or I think it was the night before that, actually, the day before yesterday, the president made this remark, which I think is mysterious. When you read it, it's kind of mysterious, right? It isn't super clear what he was talking about at the time. I think he's tried to clarify, but he said we need to be testing nuclear weapons. Now, nobody is testing nuclear weapons except North Korea. North Korea has not done a nuclear weapons test, like exploded a nuclear device, since 2017. And in fact, I think in January, if we make it to January without a nuclear test, I think that will be the longest period since the beginning of the nuclear age that we've gone without a nuclear test. So that would be great. That's the right direction. The U.S. hasn't tested nuclear weapons, I think, since 1992. And certainly not in the atmosphere since 1962. So that's a good 60-year history of restraint. So we could have been talking about testing nuclear weapons delivery systems. So that's sort of distinct. So the way nuclear weapons are delivered are on, dropped from bombers or cruise missiles, launched from bombers, from submarine-based ballistic missile tubes, or from land-based ICBMs. Those are the main delivery systems for strategic weapons. And those in the United States are tested regularly. I think the pace of Trident submarine-launched missiles, I think we test those like 5 times a year. So that's a regular occurrence. So it could have been that Russia has tested some of its new, has tested parts of all of its three parts of its triad, as we call it, those 3 different delivery system things, and that the president was reacting to that and wanted to step up the cadence of U.S. tests. It was unclear. It has been widely interpreted, like the narrative has just gone in the direction that the president meant restarting explosive nuclear testing. And there, I don't want to keep talking without you stepping in, but I can give you lots of reasons why that is an enormously bad idea.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
And then the other idea that's, again, resurgent is the Golden Dome, which as he says, let me go back. Let me go to slides a little further forward. He sees it as closure on what Ronald Reagan was thinking about a long time ago. So hold on while I get to that that slide. And then we have a guest who's come up, who's going to join us shortly, Josh Barron, who's a communications strategist who was involved in the rollout of a very influential nuclear war film back in 1983, which is, again, around the time that Ronald Reagan was pursuing his strategic defense initiative, and also trying to work with Gorbachev on actual treaties. So hold on a second while we hear from Trump back in May as the budget was passed.
Thank you for being here in the Oval Office.
Oops, sorry.
Thank you for being here in the Oval Office as we make a historic announcement about the Golden Dome Missile Defense Shield. We will truly be completing the job that President Reagan started 40 years ago, forever ending the missile threat to the American homeland. The one big, beautiful bill will include $25 billion for the Golden Dome.
It's a generational investment.
Yeah, I like the soundtrack.
It's very dramatic.
Let me bring Josh in, because a lot of this is about messaging. As you said earlier, even Trump's Truth Social post is words. A lot of Golden Dome we'll talk about in more depth in a few minutes is ideas more than actual hardware at this point. So hold on while we bring in Josh. Josh Barron.
See me? You hear me?
Yes, I can. We see and hear you. Josh Barron is Barron Strategies. I don't want to describe what you are. If you could briefly describe your role as it relates to issues.
Sure.
Like
I mean, I've been,
years.
Right. I got into the PR business through nuclear stuff, actually, in the early 80s. I did the PR for something called Ground Zero Week, which was in I think 81, and then the California Nuclear Freeze campaign in 82. And then I basically hijacked the PR around the film the day after. ABC did almost nothing. They were actually afraid of the movie. And the director gave me an early cut, and I went out and we did this big campaign, which became the most successful TV movie in U.S. history. And it still is, by the way. And we basically made the entire country sort of become one big town hall meeting about the dangers of nuclear war. And also, it was interesting that one of our strategies was tell people not to watch it alone and don't let your kids see it by themselves. It's too dangerous. So people came together in groups. So that the actual 100 million views was not accurate. It was really 150 million. The country stopped and listened to this. But, Reagan had announced the Star Wars initiative in early 83. The day after was late 83. And, we did all this campaign. ABC tried to stop me. They threatened to sue me, but they couldn't stop us. And I ended up showing the film. We had a screening for the Pope in the Vatican, for the German Parliament when they voted on the Pershing missile deployment. I showed the film to members of the House of Commons. And the idea was to use the film as a centerpiece to wake people up to what was going on. As I mentioned to Andy earlier, that when this film was being made or was finally coming out, I approached Netflix about helping them with their PR. But they had 4 firms on retainer, 3 of which are MAGA firms out of DC. And they wanted to keep it as unpolitical as possible. They didn't want to take on. So the idea was that it wasn't going to create another. I mean, some people were always going to be like the day after, this could be this big dialogue. I don't think so. I think that we don't see the bombs going off. We don't see the effect of nuclear weapons.
Right.
The power of the day after was the missiles were launched and we saw what would happen. That's what scared people. That's what scared people shitless. And then there was threads after that Ted Turner was going to show. It was a British movie, and I actually helped with Ted on that. And then actually later I worked with Ted Postal on the campaign around anti-ballistic stuff. I forget what year that was, but we did a major campaign that was actually very successful and embarrassed the Pentagon because all their tests failed miserably. They would miss by thousands of miles when they tried to test these anti-ballistic missiles. Thousands. It wasn't even close. And we wanted to make it clear that this was a fantasy and that with the nuclear weapons, even something with 98% effective would still end the world.
Right. And I'm showing
still end the world. If only 10 bombs got through, that would be the end of it. I mean, it would be cascade effect. I think what people actually, it was too bad. What we could do now is we could do short films called House of Dynamite +1, +2, +3 and show what would happen if that bomb did hit Chicago and it didn't miss? What would happen?
Well, in a way, we'll talk about that. We'll get to that maybe in 10 minutes or so, because I really like the idea of what you did back then could be done now, and where people kind of fill in the blank. Because spoiler alert, the movie ends in a cliffhanger.
Right, exactly. So what if I think I could see another little movie saying, what happens if it hits Chicago? Then what? What happens if it hits Chicago? And then it's also not clear in the film who shot the missile. We have no idea. I don't know if that's
right. Well, this is where I want to segue back to Laura, because Laura, there's several things Josh just mentioned are worth digging in on with you technically. One is the technological difference between the SDI back in 1983 and the 80s and what is being proposed now. There's been a lot of changes. And there's all these, the sort of military industrial complex is making the argument, we can do this now, including space-based components. So there's been a lot of change, but also I want to get your impressions of the scenario in the film, which is what you wrote about. So let's start with, seeing as we're in 1983 here on screen.
Yeah.
What do you see as profoundly different and not different between now and back then?
Well, in 1983, the President Reagan was proposing an impenetrable shield. So, as you mentioned, enormous, essentially, if you don't catch almost everything, even if it's 98% effective, but you still let dozens of weapons through, that's catastrophic. That could end your civilization. It's really bad news. So it was defense against a massive Soviet arsenal. So the good news is years later, the United States and Russia, after a series of arms control successful negotiations, built on the agreement that we would not be building anti-ballistic missile systems in order to escape mutual assured destruction. So that was an important keystone to nuclear reductions, was agreeing not to try to build ballistic missile defenses, and have managed to reduce the arsenals from the height of the Cold War, where there were some 60,000 nuclear weapons in existence, orders of magnitude more than you'd need to end a civilization. And so that agreement was essentially, and the logic there is, if you think that mutually assured destruction keeps you from attacking or keeps your adversary from attacking because you'll both have assured destruction, if you try to escape that by building a missile defense, then your adversary is not going to sit and accept that. Your adversary is almost certainly going to build more. Then you'll need to build more defenses, and then they'll build more offenses, and you're off to the races, the arms race. So that was an important sort of stabilizer in the way that we thought about those things. So those are two important sort of pieces. But today, so technology is different. The types of the one system that's deployed to defend against incoming nuclear-armed ICBMs for the United States is called the Ground-Based Mid-Course Defense System, and that was built using basically the technology of the 90s, and which was sort of as SDI, the Reagan Star Wars program sort of came down to earth after sort of recognizing that the technology was impossible or impractical. It became these ground-based systems. And just as sort of a cul-de-sac there, that's repeatedly in the story of missile defenses. When you realize the technology can't do the thing that you want it to do, you change the thing that you want it to do to match what the technology is. So you keep making the scale smaller and smaller. So today, since like the 2000, basically, the goal for missile defense has been to defend against a few missiles from a relatively unsophisticated adversary, such as North Korea. At that time, North Korea didn't have ICBMs or nuclear weapons, but so be it. We started to build this system in the early 2000s. And it was really, so the US withdrew from the anti-ballistic missile treaty in 2002. That was a George W. Bush decision, and rapidly allowed to escape from that whole logic that had been under the ABM treaty for 30 years, and to start moving towards building the GMD system. And that was shortly after the events of September 11th, 2001. So it was very difficult to push back against any national security decision. And the US had a lot of sympathy in the world. And I think the reaction to it was rather muted at that point. But we do know that Russia at that point started to hedge its bets and develop systems that would evade, overwhelm, or overcome any missile defenses the United States wanted to field. And that's exactly the type of system that we saw the president, Russia tested last week, that we think the president was reacting to in his tweet about nuclear testing. So just sort of echoes of history. You make decisions and decades later, they sort of come home to roost. So the technology that the system is built on is, instead of lasers in space, it's called hit to kill. So the idea is when an adversary missile, like you saw in House of Dynamite, or whoever launches it, and these are big events, the picture there on the screen is about right. It looks like a space launch, which most people are familiar with. Right. You see it from space. First, you see that bright infrared signal. Your space-based sensors will see that, and then any radars you have in the area will catch it, and that will cue your system. And in the movie, you'll see the operators in Alaska. That's where those interceptors are waiting from the U.S. and detected, and it launches essentially something about the same size, another big sort of ICBM-sized interceptor. And it propels what's called a kill vehicle, which is the heart of the system. It's something sort of the size of a mini fridge or a file cabinet, and it starts to throw it towards where it thinks the ICBM released nuclear weapon will be, and then to maneuver itself into a direct collision. So when you hear people say hit a bullet with a bullet, that's what that means. That's basically these two objects going through space, thousands of miles, going at like 30 times the speed of a jet. So enormous speeds through big spaces. And you're trying to maneuver them into a direct collision. And with the force of impact, you destroy the nuclear weapon. That's the idea. And so that's the system today. And we know a little something about how it works because it's been under development for almost 25 years now. The bottom line of that is it hasn't performed well in its tests. It definitely had a very rocky start. The more recent tests are doing better, but so what that is really, though, just kind of getting the kinks out of that hitting the bullet with a bullet part of the problem. The real issue, though, the real hardest problem is not the bullet with a bullet, even though, as I described it, it's extremely challenging from like an engineering point of view. The real hard problem is your adversary is going to do everything they can to make sure that that weapon gets through. They're going to throw decoys up and hide the warhead among them and force the defense to figure out what's the right thing with the tens of minutes that it has.
And and by the way, as you wrote in your piece, that's where the film doesn't have any of that. The film has it's a magical ballistic missile and warhead that's just a single unit. At least
it is basically I would say the only type of threat that the existing system has been tested against and might have a hope of catching. What it hasn't been tested.
Best scenario.
Yeah. So it makes it a tricky question when they say, who's right, House of Dynamite or the Pentagon, and it's like my argument in what I wrote is actually that's not the right question. The right question is, would the system we have work in a realistic scenario? So I would say the one in the film is artificial, and I understand why you do that. It'd be very complex to include all of the other stuff, and they, for whatever reason, they've decided the simplest thing is narratively the one that works the best. And there's lots of arguments in the expert community about how realistic that is and why is this the threat, and we can talk about those things. But I think if you step back and say, but we have this problem in the real world, which is this desire, and it is absolutely understandable. Anyone who starts thinking about nuclear weapons becomes horrified really quickly. Everyone has this moment, and you're like, what can we do about it? And I think that was Reagan's impulse, was we need to do something about it. This is untenable, and I agree with that. That is absolutely irrational. And
let's pause and just reflect on what he wrote after he saw the day after, which he saw a month before it was released. He saw it on Columbus Day, October 10th of 1983. It was released in November. And, right away he says, my only reaction was one of our having to do all we can to have a deterrent and to see that there is never a nuclear war. Both you and Josh, I don't know if you've dug in much on the history of how much thinking there is on whether this was further stimulating his Star Wars push more than the negotiations he did with Gorbachev, or was he really going at it in a multi-pronged way that ultimately seemed to work? In other words, if there hadn't been SDI, would there not have been the prod to the sort of conventional negotiation track, even though it wasn't workable?
So I can't answer that. That isn't my expertise. But it's what I'm just, and I'll let you think, your other guests think this through. But what I'm drawn to is you've circled deterrent. And that is essentially the way the major powers have decided they're going to handle the existence of nuclear weapons. And you'll see this in the film. They say, we did everything right, and why is this happening? Right? So I think that is, to me, rather than fussing about the details, to me that is like one of the key illuminating things about the movie, which is we've created these systems, and you will hear almost anything can be justified in the name of a better deterrent. We need more different innovations in order to make sure the enemy is never incentivized to use nuclear weapons. And that the decision is that nuclear deterrence, that's how we're going to stop nuclear war. And the argument of me and people in my community is that can never be perfect. We know human beings make mistakes. We know we misinterpret. We know technological things fail and they tell you the wrong thing. And the result, what happens in a mistake in a nuclear deterrent scenario is catastrophe. So we can't count on that forever. We've been lucky for decades. And I would argue that's not logical to think that can be extended indefinitely into the future. So I think that's a really poignant moment in the film, which is deterrent. I think Reagan, there's another way you can think about it. And his, I think, vision was, if we create a defense, then nuclear weapons will be obsolete and we can just get rid of them. And the idea would be to share missile defense, so everyone would be defended against missiles. And that's sort of a different way of going about it. I think a lot of the technical work that I've done, or others, certainly standing on in a lineage of people who worked on this for a long time, it's never been, you can't really technical your way out of it. Like, you can't fix this by building a thing to fix it. I really am convinced the longer I work on these, is the only way to do it is to disarm. That is the only way to assure we don't destroy ourselves with nuclear weapons.
So Josh, I'm going to get to you in a second on a couple of aspects of this, including that idea of building more output around the film. But I want to ask a couple more questions of Laura. So I want to be sure also everyone knows about the American Physical Society report that you worked on with several others, strategic ballistic missile defense. It's easy to Google for, APS and that. And you've dug in deep here. In other words, this is not, you're not speaking off the cuff like internet, pundits do. Are there, and I think a core reality that emerges from the work is just that these systems are deeply flawed. At the same time, there are these counter arguments. There's the Atlantic Council has this, case for homeland missile defense. The whole industry of, Lockheed et al. Are now empowered with a lot of money to dig in on aspects of this. And one of the arguments is, well, sure, it's imperfect, but it's way better than not having a shield of any kind. Is there I don't know how to describe a middle space in a world of nuclear explosions, but is there some merit to this stuff, at least as sort of an imperfect backstop?
That's a great question. It's a really good one. And I would say, in my perspective, the best arguments are for situations such as we saw in the film, right? if that weapon could, and I, even knowing better, was rooting the whole time. I was like, please let this work better than we think it will, because for obvious reasons, right? So if that were intercepted, the argument goes, the president has more options to think about what to do next. That's the argument. I think as you follow that logic chain, you may find inconsistencies there. Would the president retaliate anyway, whether or not a city was destroyed, but a country launched a nuclear weapon at the US, would the reaction be identical? I don't know. So I wouldn't argue against protecting cities, of course, of anything. So, but where I would think about this, and then I would take a step back in perspective and say two things. One, you do have to know what you're getting for what you're buying. You do have to say, does this provide protection, and against what? We've worked for a long time to try to build effective protection against a small number of things, and it's been very hard, clearly. I mean, the Pentagon has had as much money as it wants, as much time as it wants, and really has loosened the oversight reins and it could kind of do what it wanted. But it turned out to be pretty hard. The other thing is, and one of the things we've tracked in our other work is comments from officials in the Missile Defense Agency, in the administrations, about the missile defenses. And they regularly say, this is great. This works 90%. This works, without really any evidence to back it up. So one of my concerns has always been, you convince yourself that it works better than it does, and you act as if you're protected, and you may make more risky decisions based on false information. And there's enormous incentive to always paint the rosiest picture, to conduct your test program to always succeed rather than fail, right? So you do learn from failures. If you're testing a system as hard as you can to see where you need to improve it, you probably will fail. These tests have been set up to succeed. So it doesn't tell you what you need to know about how well it gives you. And then the third reason is certainly absent any other boundaries. By building defenses, you will encourage your adversary to build more offenses, unless you do something about that. And that is certainly what we see, that dynamic playing out. So in the end, are you more secure by building those? I think you have to ask more questions than, do you want to protect a city? You have to think holistically about what you get for that and what your downsides are. Does it make the threat environment worse for you? Are you going to delude yourself into doing more risky things? And in fact, watching the movie, I was pretty surprised that they only launched we're giving total spoilers, 2 interceptors.
Yeah, I was surprised at that too. It was like,
if I were in charge, I would have sent everything, as many as I could, 4 at least.
And also, they would have fired all the ship missiles too. Even if they didn't work, they would have fired them.
Yeah, so I think the theater range stuff couldn't have caught it. I think the only option there would be the existing system. And I couldn't tell from the film really whether they ran out of time, whether they were not given launch authority, whether it sort of seemed like the operator was having an emotional crisis. I couldn't tell why they didn't choose really to launch more. But again, all these systems, which are required to work under extreme time pressure and extreme importance, you have to actually be really realistic. You can't fool yourself about them. So yeah. I think they demonstrated that. Yeah.
I'm going to play a brief clip from the film. It was one that Netflix posted as part of a conversation between 2 of the stars. And it's a scene that I find deeply, one of the most troubling. And this goes back, this isn't a new idea, but it's pretty profound. Hear it? You cannot hear it?
Can't hear it.
Oh. He's offering him the menu of options for the strategic response to a first strike. And he says he calls them rare, medium, and well done. Basically, the scenarios the president is given to respond. And the president is not dealing with that easily. So that issue, as you were saying all along the line there, there's technologies, but there's also human aspects into the decision making that really make this pretty. It reminds us. One of the things about the film also that I think is very powerful is it's a good reminder of the 19 minutes reality, that this is all happening at a scale and a speed that is hard to imagine for such momentous decision making. So Josh, I'd like to get into the story aspect of it and the communication aspect. I don't think all is lost in terms of, even though you weren't given the opportunity to officially participate in the rollout of the film, it's there and seems to provide an opportunity for some sort of amplification, creative work to build on it. I'll say that, but I'll also say, of course, we're not in the media environment we were in 1983, where there were three networks.
No different, yeah.
Which is good and bad.
I don't know. I like the idea of sort of the updates on each scenario. What happens if? Done very well. The problem is most younger people have been exposed to nuclear weapons through video games, where it's kind of cool. Right. Where they're blowing up cities, you're using it, we see it in zombie movies, they blow up a city, and I would think that a lot of people think you can win a nuclear war. You can use, now we're talking about tactical nuclear weapons, as if that could be controlled. And of course, you put all these satellites in orbit, thousands of satellites are going to start shooting at each other. So we'll have space wars in space.
Right. And actually, I was going to ask Laura about that. We can have a whole nother series of conversations about how this destabilizes space. But keep going, Josh.
But I'm saying, in terms of Reagan, I actually think that I know a little bit about him seeing the day after. I talked to Michael Deaver about it afterwards, who was communications director at the White House. And he said it was very impactful. And I actually worked on a project with Reagan after he left office. And I was going to talk to him about the day after, but he was so out of it with Alzheimer's, we couldn't have a real discussion about it. But actually, I think sincerely, he thought Star Wars was a great idea. He didn't. And I'm sure people told him, "Oh yeah, we can do this," which is. And now we're in the same situation where, with Trump surrounded by all these AI people, they're going to tell Elon Musk is going to tell him, "Sure, we can build all these satellites. Absolutely, we can. Just give us another $1 trillion, and we can absolutely do this, and it can work." Because Trump's going to say, "Just do it." There's not going to be any discussion, and there's going to be no back talk saying we can't do it. Of course we can do it. And it's complete delusion. It's cultic nonsense. That's what we're in right now. So I think that none of this can ever work, ever, in the right way. It can't be protected. There's no way. It's impossible. And no one's going to really sort of say that, because they think you can fight a nuclear war and you can use your technology, especially with the new AI and quantum computing and all that kind of stuff. So I think that, but do I think there's going to be a real discussion about this now because of this movie? I don't think so. Not really. I mean, Trump hasn't even mentioned the movie. I thought he would attack Netflix, but he hasn't so far. And of course, they can dismiss it as like, oh no, our system's good. That's what we need. And I think the movie's a good argument for saying we should spend another $500 billion on missile defense. Really
stop there, because I that's what I wrote in my post yesterday, and I had a conversation through email with Laura. I said in my post, I hope Trump doesn't divert from Fox TV binging long enough to watch the film, because I think it actually could play in support of the idea of improving a flawed system as opposed to going back to de-escalation.
That was the takeaway. That was the real takeaway, was if we had a better defense system, we would have knocked that out of the air, and so I think that the Pentagon's attacked the movie somewhat, but Trump hasn't gotten into it. Maybe he's been distracted. Usually he attacks everything, including Taylor Swift. So why wouldn't he attack Netflix? Netflix was attacked twice last week on another matter, on the Marine movie and on some trend, Elon Musk attack. But I think it's going to go toward super, space platforms. It's going to be satellites. It's going to be, they're going to think, oh, well, this is going to really make us safer, when it's only going to create more. And also, all the language coming out of Russia is horrible. It's horrible. And people think, again, that's back to think we can win a nuclear war. We can somehow, they talked about blowing up London, and they were laughing about it. Is this somehow that would they could win. It would be the end of all. It'd be the truth is, if that missile hit Chicago, just one city, that probably would end civilization on the planet. With the cascade of effects, would end civilization. We would fire back. God knows how they would fire, and it would be the end. I don't even think there's no doubt. And I predicted 2 months ago that Reagan would actually test a nuclear weapon by the end of October. Instead, he announced it tested. I wouldn't be surprised if next week there's an atmosphere above ground test of like 10 kilotons or something. He can do it. It's a big, he likes the drama of it. And just because it hasn't been done in 40 years, good. And he's going to want to do it. I think that's exactly what he wants to do. I wouldn't be surprised if it's, literally days away. He's ordered people to do it.
Laura, back to you on these various things that have come up. But you were discussing the Bloomberg report on the Pentagon being unhappy with the movie's portrayal of the imperfection of the system.
Right. They, as Bloomberg reported, there was I haven't seen the memo, but they reported good chunks of it, that the Pentagon wanted to get out ahead of this with their own messaging document and thought it was an unrealistic portrayal of what would happen, and pointed to improvements in their test record. They don't test very often. So in the last decade, they've only had 3 intercept tests. So, a careful examination of what we know about the system, is totally consistent with what happened in the film. There's, I didn't think it was a realistic threat. I didn't think it was a realistic the way they approached it. But the fact that missile defense doesn't save the day, I think is sort of the larger truth, that doesn't fix these really critical problems. So I, of course, after watching the film and hearing what the film was about, had the same concerns. Not that it wouldn't make people concerned about nuclear weapons, which I think the people that I know watch it have really responded pretty strongly to it. And I think in a visceral way, because you're with people, there's enough characters in here that you can find somebody that you really identify with, and the stress and the worry that happens. And I think they communicated really well, as you said, Andy, the short timeline for decision-making and the short timeline, the way we've set up this system and the way they, even the title, I think A House of Dynamite is exactly right. Is exactly a great metaphor. We've set up this extremely complicated, deadly system that can very quickly blow up. And the only rational response is to dismantle the House of Dynamite, not try to, get, fire extinguishers or whatever. You need to really take a step back and fix that. So I think in some ways, like a missile defense would be a fire extinguisher in that scenario. But if you, so I hope that people see this and they become really engaged, because this is not only something that's really a problem, it's something that we have things we can do about it. But anyway, so thinking through the missile defense thing, which comes in this backdrop of the Golden Dome announcement. So just to give you the background of that, in January, the president announced, at that time it was called Iron Dome, which I think was trying to sort of capture some glamour from the Israeli system. But as almost everything the president does, gold is the standard. So renamed it subsequently the Golden Dome. And so it basically, it's a dramatic, radical change from past practice, which has been building a modestly sized system against a small threat. Essentially North Korea. Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapon or ballistic missiles that could reach the US. So it's really a North Korean threat. And that has been what it's constructed against. And that has been a bipartisan congressional agreement as well since 2000. Every once in a while they come and they have a debate about this, and they land in the same place, which is it is technically infeasible or very, very challenging, economically ruinous, and strategically unwise to defend against peer or near peer threats, which means Russia or China. Their arsenals, their nuclear arsenals, are sophisticated and large enough that building a missile defense system against them is just, as I said, expensive, difficult, and strategically unwise. So the Golden Dome proposal, though, proposes to defend against everything from everyone, from cruise missiles, drones, short-range missiles, to the strategic arsenals of Russia and China. So it changes the logic, which I think is an important piece of this, not just the technology, but saying Russia and China, we've decided we don't accept mutually assured destruction. We don't accept deterrence relationship. We want to revisit this and defend, which sets into motion some difficult strategic conversations. And then it directs specifically the development of a space-based interceptor system, which is, I think, the sort of callback to the Reagan days. Now, because of the problems I've talked about like a few minutes ago about how hard it is to do this type of mid-course defense, which means trying to catch those missiles as they're cruising through outer space. In the film, they don't demonstrate this, but excuse me, the real problem there is the decoys, the countermeasures, the confusing, how confusing it is. That is a very hard problem we haven't addressed seriously. And so technically, this keeps bringing up this idea of why don't we defend before you can deploy those countermeasures? Why don't we catch the missiles as they're launching, as the adversary ICBM with the nuclear weapons are on it are launching from the launch pad? That way you don't need to worry about decoys and all of that other stuff. That's been the attraction of what we call boost phase defense. The reason, but that's trading one hard problem for another hard problem. Missiles as they're launching, even the sort of slowest, earliest generation missiles will only take 3 or 5 minutes to launch while they're actively burning their engines. So that is not much time. And that leaves you to have to be within sort of hundreds, not thousands with a plural, of kilometers from that launch path. And because countries such as Russia and China are really big geographically, you can't get close enough to those launch pads that are, interior of their country. So in that case, that's why you go to space, because while your instinct is that space is far away, that's how we think about space. Space is big. And in this case, you go to space because space is closer. Because it's a funny way to think about it, but low Earth orbiting satellites of the stuff that looks at the Earth for all of the things that we do are really only like hundreds of miles from the Earth's surface. So that serves your purpose for this. So thank you. That's an illustration. But the thing is, if you're in space, you don't hang out. You have to keep moving in order to be in space. Orbit is a condition and not a place. So to stay in orbit, those satellites go around the Earth to keep going around every 90 minutes. So if you're trying to catch something within 3 to 5 minutes, as soon as you're in the right place, it's gone again. Plus, the Earth is turning underneath your orbit. So this illustration you have on the right on your screen just shows what a constellation of around 1,600 space-based interceptors would look like. Those are obviously not to scale. Those dots would be much smaller, but that's sort of what it looks like. You need this network of satellites so that you have something in the right place at the right time at all times.
So Elon Musk is going to save us by doing a Starlink version.
Yeah, and so just to say, this is just for defense against, I think, like one or two, probably one early generation missiles. If you can put 2 in one place to launch, you'll have to double that constellation. If you can make that missile launch faster, like Russia and China know how to do that, North Korea increasingly, then you'll need more. There's all these things that push you to thousands and thousands. And so like a sort of rational size threat will probably need tens of thousands. And so as you said, Andy, that's right. There are not many companies that can launch that many things at the right cadence to fill out a constellation like that. SpaceX is the obvious one.
Yeah.
So somebody would make a lot of money from building a system like this.
For sure. Yeah. I see. If you go to Lockheed's page, it's full of glossy graphics and the like. The military industrial complex likes to sustain itself, as it was stated back in the 1950s. I want to go back to this. I showed this earlier. The Center for Strategic and International Studies posted sort of a quasi-hopeful analysis of, can this all drive us to have the big players, meaning China and Russia and us, work together to at least this is my impression, to limit this small attack mode thing that would wreck everybody's day. Is this a reasonable prospect?
So thanks for drawing my attention to this article. I haven't read it, so I don't know what the argument is.
Well, just backing away from that specific article, then just the general notion that can the big boys and girls find an opportunity in this to say, hey, okay, we all know the math here, we know the strategic realities, etc. The one thing that could really F the world up is a maverick. So why don't we all work together?
I see.
On that.
I see. That would be ideal. So one thing, Russia and China have consistently over many years voiced their opposition to space-based missile defenses. That's been something that's animated them for years. They devote a lot of diplomatic energy to that, and I think have devoted some technical energy to systems that could destroy a space-based missile defense system. So in my mind, until this January, I had thought that kind of settled the problem, because it's pretty clear from a technical point of view that those systems can easily be overcome, attacked. It has always collapsed under its own weight. Every gesture towards a space-based missile defense has sort of fizzled out because those realities really become very quickly obvious. But it has never stopped. The United States has never said, but we'll never do it. So let's agree not to do it, so we can build the benefits of that into agreements with our potential adversaries like Russia and China. Let's agree not to do this and see where we could benefit together. And it sounds like this article says we could work together against small rogue, I don't like the word rogue, so smaller numbers of threats against states that these bigger states don't believe are sufficiently dissuaded by nuclear deterrence. That's been the framework for why we've built these systems anyway, is that there are people in the US government who don't believe that North Korea is deterrable in the way that we believe Russia and China are. They believe that they may not make decisions with the logic that we recognize or that we prefer, and that we would have to build a defense against that. And so if that's the logic here, which is let's work together, on those, maybe that's an interesting way to do it. I think for sure, so all the nuclear armed states are under obligation to disarm. That's a non-proliferation treaty obligation, is to pursue negotiations in good faith towards nuclear disarmament. That was part of the bargain, and so it's legal, and have also acknowledged that a nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. That they've just restated that a couple of years ago. So one can imagine really taking that obligation seriously and watching this movie and being remotivated towards the catastrophic threats that the risks that we're running, and build in a agreement that includes limits on missile defenses, that allows nuclear reductions and disarmament. That I know that Russia and China have, especially Russia, has always emphasized that the next round of nuclear reductions would require a conversation about this, that they tie those very closely. So, maybe like that is the best outcome, I think, of this Golden Dome endeavor, might be that something that allows a progress on arms control. That would be a dream.
That would be a dream. Josh, any last thoughts from you as a marketing?
Well, no, even Trump has said, nuclear war is terrible, nuclear weapons are terrible. He said that a number of times. So he does recognize that, but he still likes, the idea of, he likes going to war. Look what he's doing in Venezuela. He loves, from a distance. He likes to bomb things and so on. So, but I think we're dealing with I think there are a lot of people, unfortunately, in this administration and other people that think nuclear weapons could be used tactically. We could win a nuclear war. As I said, they've been raised on video games, and they have no idea of the real consequences of what this is about. And it's just too bad that Oppenheimer didn't show what a nuclear weapon looked like when it blew up. This film didn't. So it's it still looks like a video game. It's all kind of like things on a monitor. So we need to really see what the consequences would be.
Boy, that's a distressing reality. I think I don't know how much of that was about. Well, I should talk to Bigelow, get her on the show, the director.
I understand. I mean, from a filmic point of view, why she did what she did. She had to, but unfortunately, the day after workers, people saw what happened. They saw it, and
Right.
Reagan saw it, and that was to realize that this would really completely destroy. And we get that in the film just a little bit. They say they show you a number that 9 million people would die if Chicago was hit.
Right, but again, I've done both here. I did a conversation on the numbing effect of big numbers. That it doesn't work.
It's true, but if somebody fires a missile, they're not going to fire one missile in New York City. They're going to fire 20 missiles or 50 missiles, and they're going to be 50 in the 10 to it, and there'll be 100, 200, 300 decoys. We have so many weapons. America targeting Moscow, there are probably 50 missiles targeting the Moscow area, not one, not five. And all these decoys, as we know, this is the real problem. But we just hope that Elon Musk and his all the AI guys will just talk Trump into saying, let's spend another $1 trillion and let's do this.
I know.
We can do it.
You can kind of see. I'm showing, by the way, my friend Don Stover back in 2018 did a really good, thorough look at a day after the 1983 film and how it was made and its impact. And it's highly worth reading. Folks can just search for Bulletin Stover, Don Stover, and the day after, and it's just an incredible.
There's a book out called Apocalyptic Television. It came out last year. A whole book on the day after what happened. The book.
Sorry, Laura.
So an interesting point about that is, and when you return to A House of Dynamite, and right at the beginning, you made a really good point that the president is offered a menu of options. None of the options were hang on, don't do anything. And in fact, Idris Elba said, could we slow the fuck down? Are we allowed? Sorry. I'm allowed to say that on your live TV show, but they said in the movie, which is really what the right, I think to that, but was given a menu option. None of them were, don't do anything right now. But they described it sort of with some, gallows humor of rare, medium, and well done, something like that. We know that that the Pentagon, when doing its targeting calculations and describing what the effects of a nuclear attack would be, they leave out a lot of things. They leave out climate effects. They leave out longer term effects. They really focus on military effects. So those menu of options don't include a lot of these types of things he sees. Economic collapse, the fact that most of these attacks would take out the very hospitals that you would need in order to treat the wounded, right. The transportation systems that you'd need to get food and medicines between affected cities, the very experts who would be the ones who would treat you, the long-term fallout effects. We know it doesn't include fires and firestorms should those get ignited by an attack on a city. So we know that there's a lot of things we're not taking into account. So it's, when you bring back the actual visceral, here's what it looks like in a city. I think that's actually something that is often missing from that conversation. So that's really, thank you for recommending the article and for us to revisit that movie.
Yeah, Josh, I'd like to follow up on this to some extent here too. The campaign around the film, liberated by the crowd, essentially. This is sort of crowd sourced. Probably helped drive its impact, not just the TV Guide cover stories. And you were a part of that. So let's see if we can follow up on how to make that happen now.
As I that ABC did almost nothing. And the director had given me a copy of the film, and I used it, and I basically hijacked the movie. ABC threatened to sue me, and I said, "What are you going to sue me for? I'm going to triple your ratings. You're going to sue me for making more money?" It was ridiculous. But the point is that they were just selling a movie, and I was trying to wake up the world to the horrors of nuclear war. And so I did what I had to do. And frankly, I did the hijack around The Day After Tomorrow, the film about that was about climate change. And but that was different. I did it, and then when Fox saw how successful our campaign was being, then they helped me. They jumped in and said, "Let's help," because it looks like we tripled the grosses, of the film.
Yeah,
it actually had impact. That somebody did a study showed that it had impact. But I think that the point is we don't have the funds. We didn't have the funds to make the movie, but we had the funds to promote it or recast it or make sure people saw it in a certain light. And that's very important. The activism is very important. But that was right around the time of the nuclear freeze campaign. We had 1 million people in Central Park at one point.
Right.
So it was a different time, and this is nothing like. This time is very different. And also, we only had 3 networks. Everybody watched the networks. Yeah. There wasn't even 4. And so we were able to do that. But I was, if the director hadn't given me a copy of the film, if I hadn't sort of come up with this idea, it wouldn't have happened. And it still would have been shown, but it wouldn't have had the same kind of impact, not even close.
Yeah. So we'll have to revisit. We're at the hour, and Laura Grego at the Union of Concerned Scientists, thanks so much for your time. I do think we can do more on this, including on the question of how the public, which feels, every person feels minimized and dwarfed by these global issues. Is there a role for each of us to build off of something like the film on Netflix now, or just the reality that maybe we should just push for the other 1983 film that was a blockbuster, War Games, to be out again. This is that key scene from War Games, if anyone wasn't around for it. I'm not sure if the audio will play, but you almost don't need it. The computer ran the numbers on this was on various war scenarios.
It looks like it's muted.
Yeah, I've muted it here. And, winner, none. And you'd like to think that Golden Domes or anything else might take us away from this reality, but basically winner, none, no winner is the reality of this technological and explosive conundrum we've built for ourselves with nuclear weapons, which may have stabilized the world for a period of time, but boy, as Laura Grego said at the beginning of the show, there's never been an area that's more dangerous than where we are right now. And for those of us who grew up in the 60s with the 6 bells going to your desk reality, what I had in first grade, that's a sobering thought. So thanks so much for everyone tuning in. Thanks to Josh Barron for coming back to explore the lessons learned back in 1983, how they might be applied to our current nuclear moment. And Laura Grego, again, at the Union of Concerned Scientists. Check out her work. It's Grego, and easy to Google for. And watch War Games again, along with The Day After, which
and you can see Threads also. That's a film that's worth looking at. Failsafe, another film.
Yeah, another very intense one.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Strangelove.
Yeah,
absolutely, Dr. Strangelove. So thanks so much again. This is Andy Revkin. This has been Sustain What, and we'll do more on this issue. But global warming, as we said earlier, is a slow motion unraveling. This is one that hides in plain sight and could really end our adventure in a hurry. So thanks again, and do watch a box of a House of Dynamite. Take care and tune in. And for anyone watching, you can share the link you're watching on, and share it with someone else and see what we can do. Hold on one second.